Hello there everyone, it's Nina Marie. Thanks for joining me today for another video. I am going to be sharing a fun series of techniques today that encompass this entire project. So we're not only going to be making an edge-to-edge shaker, which is one of my absolute favorite card types to make, but I'm also going to show you how I'm going to color my die cuts with ink smooshing. Ink smooshing is another technique I enjoy working with, and today I'm going to be using oxide inks to do some ink smooshing so I can die cut the paper and create the beautiful colors that you see on these little floral bits. I mostly will use Distress Oxide or Distress inks from Tim Holtz, but you can experiment with other inks that you might have in your stash. So in today's video, I am going to be using this Whimsical branch frame from Simon Says Stamp's Rain or Shine collection. It is a series of dies that not only create this fun little frame of branches, but then you can decorate it with all of the little pieces that come with it. I've already die cut my frame from some white cardstock, and I'm going to ink blend to color in the branches. Now I did decide to mask off the outer edges of the frame so that way those stay white, and then that way I can get more free-handed with my inks that I'm going to put on the branches. I used 3 different shades of Simon Says Stamp Pawsitively saturated inks to color these branches, and I used some different sizes of blending brushes to be able to mix those colors onto different sections of the branches, just so that way I get some variation on each of those pieces. I am working on top of our Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Mat, which is helping hold my die cut in place as I'm working with it. Once I have the branches colored, then I'm going to move on to doing my ink smooshing. So I'm bringing in a piece of plastic here. This is a stamp pocket that works really well for being able to transfer my ink onto my paper. I like to use this carrier sheet method because it allows me to maintain a little bit more control when I do the smooshing. Smooshing is very easy. You just press the ink pad into your carrier sheet, and then you spritz it with a little bit of water to get the ink moving, and then bring it over to your paper and start pressing it onto the cardstock. Now this paper that I'm using today is some Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock. It takes water really well, but it doesn't have the texture of a watercolor paper, so I really like that. I'm using a variety of pinks, oranges, and yellows to do the ink smooshing on my paper. I'm focusing the orange on one half of the paper and then the pink on the other half. That way when I go to do my die cutting, I have some delineated choices for my colors. I wanted to make sure I had a good assortment of orange and pink in my card, so by focusing those colors on one half of the cardstock, it allows me to make sure that I'm always going to have a little bit of something that I'm looking for. In between each layer, I am drying it with my heat tool because that's going to keep the layers from moving as much. Distress oxides and inks are very reactive to water, so anytime I put more layers of ink on top, it is reactivating some of the colors underneath. But if you dry them in between each layer, you will keep the colors a little bit more delineated. I did splatter this with some water to create that water splatter effect. I always like to take my heat tool and dry those splatters just a little bit before taking my cloth and lifting them off. It just helps to make that water dry into the ink a little bit more. It allows them to stand out a bit. Alright, so I've gone ahead and colored this sheet of paper with my inks. I'm really happy with how this is looking, and I'm just going to go ahead and trim off some sections of the paper that I like most, that I want to definitely die cut with the floral die that's included in that Whimsical branch frame set. I'm going to die cut these inside of my Platinum Scout machine. It's a mini die cut machine that is fantastic for small die cuts like this, and this is going to give me a nice assortment of little florals that I can add to my branch. Now I'm also going to die cut the leaves. I am cutting the leaves from 2 different colors of cardstock. I have a light green and then also a more grass light green. This variation in the leaf color will help add some interest to everything. I am putting all of these little die cuts into a dish so that way I can keep track of them and not lose anything. Bringing back in my Craft Tacky Mat and a white sheet of cardstock, I'm just going to ink blend a simple blue background. I don't want anything too fancy here. I'm just adding some tumbled glass around the edges of this white cardstock, leaving the very center of the paper white. Then I brought in a little broken china, and I'm going to add a little bit more of that darker blue around the outermost edges, just to add a little contrast. To give the background a little bit of texture, I am going to splatter this with some water. So I just spritzed a few droplets into my hand, and then I'll go ahead and flick that over top. This is some standard white cardstock. This doesn't take a lot of water very easily, but for something simple like this, just creating that water splatter effect, it works just fine. I'll go ahead and dab off any of that excess water with a paper towel, and that gives me a really cute little texture there. To enhance that a bit more, I am going to use some oxide spray in the salvaged patina color, and I'm going to use this to create a little bit of an ink splatter effect. I'm just going to use the nozzle of the bottle to go ahead and tap this across my paper, giving me a nice assortment of little splatters. This I'm going to go ahead and let dry before I bring in some white paint. I love a good white splatter, so this is going to give me a nice little assortment of texture to go with those blue splatters. Once my background was dry, I'm going to go ahead and turn this into my edge-to-edge shaker. I've cut a piece of plastic. I happen to be using some plastic that you can purchase. These are clear bags. However, if you don't want to use something like that, you could use some leftover stamp packaging to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and run some Terrific tape around the edges of my cardstock. We want all 4 sides of this paper to have a line of adhesive. This is going to help us form the pocket that our sequins are going to sit in. And then I'll remove the release paper from 3 of the sides of my panel. Make sure you leave the 4th one still intact because we do need an area that's open to allow us to pour the sequins into our pocket. Now I'm going to take my plastic and start folding that over into the exposed adhesive. Once I start folding these over, I do have the corners that need to be cleaned up a little bit. So I'll just take my scissors and go ahead and trim those up, just so that way they're nice and clean and flush to the card. So now we have our pocket. It is ready to be filled with some fun sequins. So I have some here. These are iridescent sequins from Trinity Stamps. I thought those would be beautiful for a soft color. Then I brought in some of these little floral sequins. These are clear. I don't remember where they came from. If I can find them, I'll link to them in the video description with all the other products that I'm using today. But then I also have this fun little assortment of blue sequins as well. So I just mixed a few things together. It's always fun to be able to try to use up some stuff in your stash because for shaker cards, you can get really creative with what you put inside. So I folded up the other end of that plastic into the adhesive to close all those sequins inside, and that'll give this a really good shake to make sure everything's mixed up nicely. Now I can glue my pretty little frame onto my card project. I am using some liquid glue for this. This is Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue. I'm running the adhesive along all the edges of the frame, but then I also added a little bit of glue to the trees as well. Then I can go ahead and line this up onto my shaker card. Sorry, my head gets in the way a little bit here. I'm just trying to make sure it was straight. And then I'll press that down really well to get the glue to bond. If you need to, you can always stick something heavy on top to make sure it adheres well. And then I always wipe up a little bit of the excess glue that might have squished out because it is on top of plastic, so it wipes off very easily. Now it's time to decorate those little branches. So here I come in with my leaves, and I'm using my tweezers to help me line these up very carefully on top of my trees. I'm just trying to figure out the best placement. I thought starting with the leaves made most sense, and I'm adding those to the places where I definitely want to have the greenery. I'm using Craft Tacky Glue to adhere all of the leaves. However, I do want to pop my florals up, so we'll move on to foam tape when we're ready to start adhering those down. So once I have a bunch of leaves adhered, I'm not necessarily done with the leaves, but at least I have it started. Now I can start bringing in some of the florals. And here I'm using some small 3D foam squares from Simon Says Stamp to attach these little florals onto my card. So I'm adding them on some of the branch tips. I'm also layering them over top of some of the leaves, just trying to figure out a nice placement. Now some of these smaller flowers, they're so tiny, they're not going to be able to fit some foam tape behind them, so I'll actually just glue those straight down onto the project. But I did use the foam squares for any of the larger flowers. You're just going to go along and figure out the placement that you like. If you'll notice, I am leaving the top right corner empty because I do want to put a sentiment there, so I'm making sure to leave that empty intentionally. The tweezers are really helpful for these really small florals to make sure that you can get your fingers underneath them and be able to get them perfectly placed on your project. Once I have my flowers attached, then I can come back in with any of the leaves to fill in any spots that I felt like needed a little bit of something. Now I need to add some centers to each of these flowers. You could use the die that cuts out a bunch of different centers. However, I wanted a little sparkle. So I'm going to use some Pawsitively Dazzling gems from Simon Says Stamp in both this pretty pink color and also yellow. This I thought was the perfect little touch to each of these little blossoms, and I will make sure every single flower gets a cute little gem. So I'm mixing up which ones I'm using across the card. I don't want all the flowers to have the same gem. Now I'm going to bring in this die set. This is not a brand new die set. This is the Just a Note CZ design set, but I love it. It's a nice size and it's perfect for an everyday card. So I'm going to cut the shadow layer from some teal cardstock. This is a really nice dark color and it adds some contrast to the card. And then I will cut the sentiment itself out from some white. And I will cut this twice because I want to stack them up on top of each other just for a little dimension. I'm using that craft tacky glue to put adhesive on the backside of those sentiment pieces to layer them up together. That shadow layer is a great way to add a separation from a delicate sentiment like this and your busy background. So this will be able to stand on its own very nicely on my card and not get lost. I'm going to pop this up with a few foam squares just to give it some dimension, and that will look really cute tucked up into this top right corner of the card. Once I have it placed just right, I'll press it down, and then I'm going to shake this up and you can see how cute it is with all those fun little sequins inside and those pretty blossoms on top. I love it. It's such a fun way to color your die cuts. You don't have to cut your dies from just plain cardstock. Having something like a inky background and using that as your colored cardstock, so to speak, is a great way to add some variation and interest to a project. So I hope you were inspired by today's card. Not only did we make a fun edge-to-edge shaker, which I am always game for, but we also got to create such a fun, colorful background that worked perfect for die cutting and using on this card. So I hope you enjoyed. If you would love to see more inspiration using Simon Says Stamp's brand new Rain or Shine collection, I would encourage you to participate in their blog hop that is happening today if you're watching this on Saturday, March 22nd. There is lots of inspiration to be seen on the hop, so if you want to participate and see even more colorful spring-inspired ideas, be sure to check out the link below to my blog, because over on my blog I have links to the next stop of the hop and also the Simon Says Stamp blog where you can see the entire list of blog participants. So I hope you'll enjoy that, and then please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed. I will be coming back to you very soon with more inspiration. However, until I see you again, I hope you all have a wonderful, bright, colorful day, and I will see you again very soon.